But just again, on behalf of the South African National Editors Forum, good day, and thank you very much for joining this very important webinar looking at the impact of COVID-19 on our beloved industry. My name is Mahlase. Essentially, we've all seen the news reports, the magazines that are shutting down, leading newspapers pleading for help as they try and pay salaries, and some major media houses introducing salary cuts as part of desperate measures to stay open. As SANEF, we commissioned the report so we can have a better understanding of the impact of the disease on the industry. We wanted to establish how badly the COVID-19 crisis was affecting the media so that we can have a basis for motivating, hopefully, for a relief measure to help out. As you will hear from our panelists, the report clearly indicates that never has the news media been so necessary as audiences have turned to trusted organizations for credible and factual news as they try and understand better this disease. But sadly, some media houses are facing an uncertain future, and journalists are bearing the brunt as many lose their jobs or have had to continue working with massive salary cuts because we have seen advertising revenue decline. We are hoping that the launch of this report will assist in developing the second phase of trying to arrest this crisis and hopefully find relief. At our last webinar, there were some suggestions that were put on the table, but we felt that let's get a clearer picture of what is happening in the industry so that we can chart a way forward. Without wasting any more time, let me introduce you to our panel. We've got Rumney, who is a media researcher who put together the report, holding extensive interviews with various industry players and also speaking to those that are actually affected. We also have Adriaan Basson, who is the Editor-in-Chief of News 24 and Treasurer General for the South African National Editors Forum. We also have Phathiswa Magopeni, who is the Editor-in-Chief for SABC News, and Carol Mohlala, who is the Director of the Association of Independent Publishers. I'm just going to ask Rumney to kick us off, basically to give us the highlights of his findings. Reg?
Okay, hi, yes, thanks very much. As you said, the purpose of this research was really to find out how badly the news media, or the media rather, was affected by...
Sorry, Reg, sorry to bother you. The technical team is saying just try and see if you can switch on the video now. They seem to have been able to enable it, and I'll ask all of the panelists just to see if, yes, there we go. Thank you very much. Okay, Reg, over to you.
Nope. Yes, yeah, there I am, great. Okay, so let me see if I can share the screen and put up my slides. Okay, so I just need to, where is the PowerPoint? Okay. Desktop 1. Can you see the slides?
Yes, if you could put it in,
Coming up.
There we go.
There we are. Okay, so that was the purpose. The purpose was to find out in a very short space of time. This was research in a hurry. We didn't really have much time. We wanted to find out as it happened, because it's pointless doing a very comprehensive report, you know, so long after the fact that there's no purpose. We didn't know when we started, this was the beginning of the lockdown, whether there'd be any media left. In fact, a lot of the you know, a lot of the international media, not a lot, but some of the international media commentators were talking about a media extinction event. You know, so there was a lot of pessimism. I'll just go to the next slide. Yeah. So what is clear is that the COVID-19 lockdown and regulations and have hit the media industry hard globally and locally. And what I would like to point out and stress is that the health and economic crises are not over. So the lockdown has now been phased out. Some things will return to normal, but really there are serious problems in future. What the crisis did is sparked interest in the news. And audiences for news soared for credible news sources, and that was part of the report. What the report also shows that I think is quite important is how dependent we are on advertising. So, while audiences, for instance, for broadcast news and online news surged, the newspapers initially, you couldn't even get them because going out was discouraged, there was no purpose publishing in some cases because retail advertising had disappeared and so forth. But anyway, while audiences surged, advertising definitely did not. So what I'll just show you the side briefly. I'm not going to dwell on it. What it shows is how badly the economists think that the advanced economies, and we tend to follow the advanced economies as a country, and South Africa are going to be hit. Now, this is the IMF forecast. This is a sort of a best case forecast of a contraction of 6% in the economy. And that is, it might be worse than that. I don't want to overstate the case. It's hard to tell. As I said, when I started the research, the gloom was all encompassing. But maybe there are rays of light. As I said, the economy is projected to contract, and the problem with that is that advertising budgets are likely to be mauled. Already, a lot of advertisers have kind of pressed pause, or certainly did so during the lockdown. They didn't advertise at all. Some advertisers didn't want to see their ads next to COVID news. And what was the news? COVID, okay. So we wait to see what lasting changes this crisis will actually wreak. So, will readers stick with online news? Will they go back to newspapers? We don't know. Will temporary layoffs be made permanent? Because obviously the UIF Temporary Relief Fund did enable news organizations to lay off people temporarily, and then the UIF stepped in with money. But what happens if this economic crisis lasts a long time? What will happen to? I haven't attempted to answer that, but I just feel necessary to raise that. So some advertising at least will return along with the new normality, but the economic effects are likely to be grim in the long term. Okay, so in summary, I mean, it's a long report and maybe overlong, but anyway, jobs have been lost, perhaps hundreds in independent publishers particularly, and the 2 magazine division closures. Now, I think retrenchments loom. I can't foretell the future, but it looks to me that if the economic forecasts are as bad as they turn out to be, that's the irony. And this time we're actually going to see retrenchments. Now, what does seem to be the case is that media operations that were struggling have been pushed to the edge or over it. And, the problem for online is that the audience is moving online, as we pointed out in the Paying the Piper report some couple of years back. But the challenge remains the business model. You go online and your advertising revenue decreases. So what do you do? Okay, so, and also what the crisis did underline is the importance of rescue funds. And really the task we have is looking in the future is finding ways to fund the news media sustainably, including the public service media, and it's made it more urgent because, why are we so dependent on advertising, for instance? And of course, that is the challenge for all the print publishers, to get people to pay for their news. So that's the summary. I haven't looked at the competitive situation. That wasn't the purpose of this report. The purpose was really to show what happened. And really what I found was that audiences surged. People were looking for news. A lot of the online sites saw the audiences double. But the advertising is a problem. And maybe that will normalize, but I'm really not sure. So, okay, we'll take it from there.
Thank you very much, Reg. Just to say to all of our participants that the full report is available on our website and people can go through it. There is also an executive summary for easy access to it that details some of what our panelists will be talking to. We will allow for a question and answer session. For now, I'm going to hand over to Adriaan Basson, who is the editor-in-chief of News 24.
Thank you very much, Mahlatse and colleagues. Nice to join you from a lockdown office. I'm still pretty much working in lockdown mode. I think it's a big change for all of us today. I have the easier part of today, which is to talk about the good stuff. So there's not a lot of good during this time for the media, but the digital side has really been an extraordinary moment for not only South African media, but globally. As Rich has said, we have seen a surge in traffic from audiences in South Africa and globally to news websites, trying to understand the crisis, trying to get basic information about the virus on the health side, but also on the economic consequences of the virus. Obviously, our country has been hit very hard as well in terms of job losses, the contraction of the economy, and whatever is still to follow. So just referencing Reg's report, I think it's worthwhile to just quickly go through some of the top line numbers for March and April. You all will remember that we had our first COVID-19 case in South Africa on the 5th of March. So March was really the first big spike for news websites in South Africa. Now, according to Narrative, which is the platform used by the IAB to track and measure audiences and page views on South African websites, the increase for usage has been across the board. So there's no news website that didn't see an increase in its audience and its page views during the month of March, which again proves Reg's point. But looking at those percentages in detail tells really an encouraging story. So, so just to refer to some of these numbers, News 24 during the month of March went up to 12 million UBs, which was an increase of 103% audience month to month. So that is from February to March. Then we have Business Tech that saw an increase of 48% in UBs. We saw Citizen, the citizen.co.za, growing its page views and its audience by over 70% in the month of March. Eyewitness News growing its page views by 51% in March and its audience by 44%. And Business Insider growing its audience by 89% and page views over 100% in the month of March. Moving to April, we also saw the likes of the Daily Maverick increasing its audience by 28%. So as we saw globally, there's been an amazing increase in the amount of interest in the news, and I think the good thing for me, the top line thing to take from this is that South Africans are turning back to reliable sources of news in a time of crisis. In a time of crisis, you don't go to Twitter to hear what the most popular tweets have to say about the crisis, but you actually want real information. But colleagues, as you will know, like in the rest of the world, the challenge remains for us in the digital space to turn our businesses into profitable businesses that can support sustainable journalism for the future. In this regard, we have seen locally some examples of increase in subscriptions on sites like Netwerk 24, the Afrikaans subscription site, as well as on the Daily Maverick, who has got a Maverick Insider model, which is similar to the Guardian's model of donations, where people can donate an amount of money, which then goes towards funding that business. I've looked at the international research that's come out in the wake of COVID done by INMA, the International News Media Association. And what was very interesting for me there is that an institution like INMA now talks about paywalls like an absolute no-brainer. They no longer talk about whether you should have a paywall or not. It is really about what paywall you have, what format does your paywall take, how much do you charge, and what percentage of your revenue that will follow. So it seems to me like the international discussion on sustainable journalism funding has moved away from yes or no for paywalls, but to what kind of paywall. And I think an organization like INMA, and I can distribute this report if to those who are interested, has found that we simply have to charge for good journalism to survive. There's no way around that going forward. Some interesting stats from that report, just to kind of end off. The New York Times, that big monster that we all love to idolize, has seen a spike of 587,000 subscribers during this period. And I think that's really incredible, and I draw inspiration from that. They went over the 5 million mark of total online subscribers, only online, people who pay for news. Internationally, the survey that was done by INMA, between the European titles and the US titles, saw a almost 14% spike in subscribers on those continents. So again, this is very good news for all of us, considering a paywall, considering a subscription model going forward. And lastly, the counter side of that is that the report also found that media companies who invested a lot in events has seen a massive decline in that part of their business, of course, due to social distancing and lockdown regulations. But thank you, Mahlatse. I will end there. So in summary, really, it's been a good time for online, and internationally, the consensus seems to be that reader revenue is where our focus should be going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriaan. I'm going to be handing over to Phathiswa, who is the editor-in-chief of SABC News. Of course, SABC has played quite a central role in ensuring that South African public is informed. Phathiswa, over to you.
Good morning, Mahlatse, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the report that Reg has tried to put together. And yes, it's correct that it's right at the start, but it's a worthwhile effort that we even get to this point of thinking of engaging within the industry about what bothers us and how the COVID-19 impact is going to affect all of us. Yes, it's correct that at some point we're going to have to look at a more longitudinal study that's going to look at the impact over an extended period and look at more sustainable solutions to the problems. But starting with the impact of COVID-19 financially on the SABC, and I think the greatest of our problems is programming displacement and the issues around the revenue mix of the SABC. I mean, it's widely known that the lack of funding of the public mandate will remain a huge issue until it's resolved. But we are even more exposed at this point when we are expected to deliver public service messaging that we know is not funded. I mean, the fact that we rely on advertising and sponsorships, which we are basically in the same space as private sector media. 84% of our revenue comes from advertising and sponsorships. 13% comes from license fees, and only 3% is a government grant. So you can see that we play in the same space that the private sector media is playing in, and that doesn't assist us to deliver what we are meant to deliver as a public service broadcaster. So that is the greatest danger for public broadcasting, because the dependence on advertising and sponsorships means that
Did we lose Phathiswa?
The SABC is competing with others of revenue. Hello?
Yes, we've got you now.
All right,
yeah.
All right. So one of the things that have happened is that with displacement in programming, we all know how these media briefings go. You sit for extended hours that you can't break and schedule advertising. And that means that you literally have to go back to the market and tell advertisers that as a result of the extended media briefings that we have to cover as part of our mandate programming, we've had to displace all the programming that links to the adverts. So it's a huge issue. And also the fact that during the lockdown, we are not able to host any outside podcasts that would generate revenue for us. We're not able to host any events that would give us commercial benefit. And the regulatory restrictions around news. While we all say that people are sitting at home and watching television, which shows in the numbers. I mean, the news channel is now the market leader on both DSTV and the national market. But the reality is, the regulatory restrictions around advertising in news are holding us back. And you have issues like you can't do product placements, you can't do squeeze bags, you can't do anything because there's always that risk of commercial contamination of our editorial content. So there are serious things that we're struggling with as public broadcasting. But on the operational impact, I mean, we've had to split our teams. We have a team that operates from Nasrec and a team that operates in Auckland Park. The reality is we never budgeted for what we are doing in Nasrec, but it's a necessity because we have to keep numbers down in the newsroom in the Auckland Park complex, which relates to the issue of social distancing and ensuring that the environment is conducive for everyone to continue working without fear of being infected. So it's been a huge burden on us in terms of costs that we didn't cater for. And the editorial impact has been the biggest issue again. Not only that we've had to navigate providing public messaging versus what we are supposed to play as a public news service and sort of provide critical watchdog journalism as SABC. There have been instances where we have been charged for trespassing. I mean, there's a pending case that's coming up in George next week. Our crew was charged for accessing a facility that was to be used as a COVID-19 makeshift hospital. We needed to film and actually tell that story, but we were arrested and charged for that. And there was another incident in the Northwest, but that has died down because there was no reason why our crew was being charged for being part of a Labour Department farm inspection. But for some reason, the authorities thought that there was something wrong with what we're doing, but that seems to have gone away. So the issues around us being expected to fill the gap where there's information, there are information gaps, particularly in African languages, which is the bulk of our audiences. Talk about whatever you have on the SABC News channel and what you have on SABC3 as English audiences. That's minuscule. The bulk of our audiences is on radio, it's on television, which is free to air. But when messaging from government does not cater for those audiences, we are expected to close the gap as we continue to cover the story. But again, you still have to maintain the balance between public messaging and your editorial independence in the way you deliver the story. And there have also been instances of intimidation and editorial bullying, where you have some people thinking that there are questions we shouldn't be asking them. I mean, these are justified and valid journalistic questions, but they're being seen as something else. But for our credibility and for the credibility of the journalism sector as a whole, we need to make sure that our content is evidence-based, is factually supported and properly contextualized. So when people think that there are questions that shouldn't be asked, that cannot be. We need to maintain our independence, and we need to ensure that we play the role that we're supposed to play as a public news service. The last part is on emotional impact, and I think we haven't given as much attention to this in the context of COVID-19 impact. It's a critical aspect. I mean, when there's a positive case that's being reported, no matter how distant from your teams, you always have to deal with the fears, you only have to deal with the anxiety. And we've been fortunate because we have a wellness center that's working with the newsroom across the country. And you are able to say to them, we've had a case here, can you please intervene? But you always have to have that ongoing support that is critical to the ongoing functioning of the newsroom. But the other problem is the exhaustion of our teams. this is an ongoing story that you have to continue telling. And unlike elections, you always know that there's an end point. With this one, you actually don't know when it's going to end, and it has an impact. It has an impact on our teams and our newsrooms, and we always need to find a way to be in touch with our teams. And it's at a huge emotional cost even to editors, but you always have to find ways to deal with your teams, even though you are not even equipped to do so or have the tools to manage anxiety. So I'm mentioning these because they are intertwined as the quality of journalism is important to its survival. So that's why I'm going to leave it.
Thank you very much, Phathiswa, and thank you for raising the challenges that are very real for all of us in the industry. But I also just wanted to add, I mean, in terms of the SABC, the average audience for Zulu language TV news the week after the national disaster was declared increased 40%, and Xhosa news audiences rose by 60%. And I think that re-emphasizes what we've been saying around the public going to traditional news sources for that credible information. Of course, as the report details, it's all not been quite pretty. If you look at the print industry in particular, they have been seeing most of the pressure. The first and most visible casualty was the magazine industry, with the closure of 2 magazine publishers, with the loss of 97 jobs at the one publisher and up to 250 at the other. So, and away from the limelight, small independent hyperlocal print publications were also ravaged. This was in the first phase of the lockdown, as small publishers were unable to access emergency funding, resulting in the loss of an estimated 300 to 400 journalists losing their jobs. Those are quite huge numbers. Also, workers at 3 of the so-called Big 4 print media companies were forced to take salary cuts of up to 45%, and temporary layoffs have been widely implemented. I just thought, let me just include those figures as this conversation continues. And the one sector that has been hardest hit has been the local publishers. And I'm going to hand over now to our colleague, Carol Mohlala, who's the director of the Association of Independent Publishers. Carol?
Thank you, Mahlatse. Let me first apologize. My connection is so bad, so I had to move to the car. So I'm going to switch off my video because the background is not that great, but then I'll continue to talk to the issues. Yeah, COVID-19 has hit local, like community media so much, so that one of the key things that we are facing ever since the existence of AIP is publications closing down. Yes, this was an issue, but it is continuing. We have seen it at a rapid rate. Even though there's been a few success stories, I could see as part of the attendees that Anton Panzel was here for Limpopo Miria, who is one of our few members who's doing well online. But even with online, there's so much challenges for our local guys, you know, in terms of trying to keep up with what is happening online, and also the cost of trying to maintain content online, which is something that is quite new to us as we are quite big on print, has been things that we've been trying to grapple with. Yes, there's been emergency funding, but it's not nearly as enough, you know, and this is not me trying to knock out the MDDA, but if you are giving a publisher 20,000, what do you expect them to do with it if their print cost is about 65,000? You know, and our members have been hard hit. They've been forced to reduce their staff. I know a whole lot of other people in Western Cape have stopped using freelancers altogether. We've lost our only newspaper that is into Venda. And it's really had been a challenging time for us. But we've had people that are trying to keep up beats. What I usually say when I speak to them is that COVID-19 kicked us while we were down already. So it was just that final kick for some of our members, because we were experiencing these challenges before COVID-19, and came the lockdown, came the reduction of advertising, came people cancelling their contracts for advertising, and government ad spend not to be seen anywhere in community newspapers. It was just the end, unfortunately, for most of our members.
Thank you very, very much, Carol. Colleagues, I'm going to be inviting questions now. What I will do is you can raise your hand or you can use the chat box function. I have seen some questions there and I will be going to them, but otherwise you can raise your hand and you will be given permission to talk. And we are hoping to take as many questions as possible. If we could at least be very short, just to ensure that we get as many questions as possible. As I look to my side to see who has raised their hand, I'm going to start with this question that has come through, and it's to you, Adriaan, which says that you're suggesting that we are likely to see more online sites going the paywall route. Is that what you're suggesting in your presentation? And just a rider from me to add to that, Adriaan, is that we know that not everybody has seen online media as a space to buy or buying journalism online. How would we be able to convince the South African public of this if that's what you're suggesting?
Thank you, Mahlatse. Thank you, Herman, for the question. Undoubtedly so. I think that if you look at where the world is going and has gone in the past year or two, it will be foolish of any media company, big or small, not to consider some form of reader revenue, whether it is more the kind of Guardian Maverick, Daily Maverick model, or whether it is the New York Times subscription model that big publications like the Financial Times and smaller ones like the Boston Globe have been running successfully. And locally, we saw very great successes with Netwerk 24. On their paywall. I think it's no longer a question of a luxury of whether you could experiment, but it's become a necessity. It will become a necessity for media companies to gather reader revenue through websites. Mahlatse, to speak to your question on user behavior and paying for content online, I remember attending international media conferences as early as 4 or 5 years ago, where the idea of online subscription models were kind of laughed at. And obviously in the past 5 years, there's been internationally a rapid move towards paying for music online, to paying for movies online, to e-commerce. And I think something like a lockdown has exacerbated the ease with which people will transact online. And I think it will, as media industry, we're simply going to have to capitalize on that moment, on that momentum of the change in user behavior to pay for online content. I have seen research that's come out of the US about younger people being more willing to pay online, which is encouraging. It would be interesting, Reg, to see if there's something similar locally, whether we could poll younger South Africans around their online expenditure habits and whether that will extend to media or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriaan. There's a question here from Robert Makatu, who says, my question is based on revenue and paper industry future in a digital world. During COVID-19 lockdown, there has been distribution and sharing of papers on social media platforms daily. I would like to know, with current trends of paper industry in a world shifting from printed paper towards digital, how are we making revenue? How will we make revenue to sustain the current distribution? I think he's referring to those digital papers that we've all received in our WhatsApp messages. Reg, do you want to try this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think you're talking about e-editions. That is, these sometimes PDFs, but they are digital reproductions of a newspaper or magazine. And they have become quite popular, or they're particularly popular when you couldn't publish magazines at all. There's renewed interest in them. So they will be tried, but a lot of people still prefer the tactile feel of a magazine, for instance. So that won't go away. Yeah, a lot of things will be tried. I don't know if we're going to go back. I don't know if the e-media or the e-editions are really the answer. Part of the problem apparently in Africa is that if you produce an e-edition as a PDF, it gets shared without people paying for it. And so, in the end, people have to pay. We have to pay for our news somehow or another. Either we pay, government pays, or donors pay. Somebody has to pay for the news. And I think what Adriaan is signaling is that paywalls will become the reality, or membership models where people donate. In all cases, what it means for us as journalists is we have to be closer to our audiences in order to persuade them that it's worth paying. I think that's the message.
Thank you, Reg. Dario says 2 observations. 1, how do you ensure the reliable, credible media are the go-to sources for important news, even when there is no crisis? And then 2, linked to this, how do you incentivize members of the public to pay for news when there is no crisis? And I think that speaks to the conversation we were just having now, just around paywall, and I guess, also the responsibilities on us to educate the public that quality journalism unfortunately costs money and it is not for free. And perhaps that is a conversation that we will all need to have. I'm just going down the questions quickly. Marinette says that it will be crucial to do some qualitative research, both in terms of what the audience wants, believes, and with regards what is really going on in the newsroom. Quantitative research helps to make decisions, yes, but qualitative research helps to answer the so what question for the better. Thank you very much for that comment. I thought I would be able to allow people to ask questions, but I am not winning in that regard. Kate, can you help me? Kate? Okay. All right. While Kate is answering that,
yes. Hi, Mahlatse. Yeah. I mean, basically, people should be able to ask their questions, or we can just go through the chat box.
Okay. All right.
So
a lot of people
need to go through the chat box.
Okay. If they could also just use the Q&A, that will also work much better, because I'm going through the chat box as fast as I can. Raymond Joseph says, I'm hearing lots from the big media houses, which are more financially able to weather this storm financially, about how tough times are. Meanwhile, there's a bloodbath happening around small independent community media. What is SANEF, big media, going to do to include them and helping them find ways to survive? Before I give it to perhaps one of the panel members, just to answer on behalf of SANEF, this is quite a critical point, and that is why in all of the conversations we've been having, we have included AIP as an example and other community media, because we recognize the role that they play. They are much closer to their audiences. We are also living in a time where people want to hear about issues that affect them directly, and when newspapers or local community papers shut down, the danger there is that you are curtailing people's access to information, and also in languages that they best understand, and that is why this is a worry for us. The question from Isaac Minar. The president invited SANEF to engage government on ways to assist the media. Which of these issues should be put on the list, and what else? I think I'll open this up to all of our panelists who want to answer it, because it is quite a critical one. I see somebody also posted, if we are going to government for help, how do we ensure that we remain independent, critical, and able to hold them accountable? Phathiswa, I see you nodding. Should I start with you?
Okay, where am I? What have I done?
There we are. We can see.
Oh, okay, I'm on. Yes. I mean, the issue of editorial independence versus the funding of journalism, I don't think if you have the right leadership in these media houses and you have you give proper guidance to journalists who go out in the field, I don't think it's an issue. I mean, I'm thinking about the fact that with the 3% government grant that we get, there was interference, and there are always attempts to influence us to do things. But we know that with the 84% of our revenue that's coming from advertising and sponsorship, we can actually stand our ground and say no to things that are not meant to be in our editorial content or in the way that we are expected to do things that are in violation of our editorial policies. So I don't think we should be scared of taking that approach and go to government and say, journalism is important for the democracy of the country, and it's important for human development and progress in the country, and therefore make it work, because it's not only about what these media houses are doing for their own sustenance, it's about the population that relies on these media houses for content. So I don't think it's something that we can't deal with. We can deal with the right leadership in the newsrooms and with the right guidance given to journalists.
Thank you, Phathiswa. And just to continue on Isaac's question, and I'll pass it to you, Reg. He's asking if perhaps we should be going to government and asking for tax breaks for news organizations, zero rating of public service content, including online news services, loans, bridging finance, ways in which internet platforms such as Facebook and Google should share their advertising income with media houses. All those, Reg?
Yeah, sure. So he mentions commitments on government advertising spend. Well, commitments have been made to community media, but that doesn't seem to have come through. It seems to be difficult for government to commit advertising spend to particular news organizations. I remember that government also is expected to spend money effectively. So if an ad is necessary, if it's necessary to put an ad in the Sunday Times, for instance, to get a reaction from a whole range of people, well, that's perfectly justifiable. I think the government should actually think, particularly around this COVID crisis, of actually spending money to advertise the message it's trying to get across, and also help the media at the same time. And that would include small hyperlocal publications. So that is one thing government can do. Tax breaks is an interesting thing. Tax breaks only help organizations that are making a profit. If you're losing money, a tax break doesn't mean anything. What has been interesting in Canada is that individuals have been given tax breaks or tax refunds for buying subscriptions to local media. So if you bought a subscription to News 24, you could take that off your tax. It's a little thing. I don't know to what extent it would help here. Zero rating of public service content, that is for purposes of data, absolutely, including news services. I think that we should ask for. We should actually, but actually more than that, we should be pushing for bridging the digital divide, making it cheaper for people to actually access online news generally. So that is a big push we need to, I think as media, we have to support. Loans, bridging finance, well, nobody's going to say no to that in times of crisis, but loans have to be repaid. And then the last one, which is an interesting one, around the world there's a recognition that Google and Facebook have taken a lot of the ad revenue that should go to online news. This is a fact. I'm talking about morally, not in any other way. You know, Google and Facebook consume 70% of online ad revenue. So what space is there for online news? What I think should happen is that Google and Facebook, first of all, should pay tax in the places they operate. And yes, some of that tax money could be devoted to local news media. And it's an international thing, so we're going to see what happens internationally, and maybe we need some sort of international movement on this.
Carol, there's a lot of talk around going online. A lot of your organizations reach the public that is not necessarily living online, and data remains quite a major issue. How do we ensure that the small publications stay alive in these times so that you have the larger, poorer public still able to access information and not left out of the information world simply because they can't afford data and they don't have access? Carol?
Mahlatse, sorry, my connection is so bad. I'm not sure if I'm going to be audible.
We can hear you.
You can hear me? Oh, okay. We have engaged government, so that's the first thing. So we have engaged government, and we are part of a working group where we are trying to make sure that government somehow contributes to the sustainability of the sector. And with that said, it's a dragging process that takes forever. But we have engaged government, and luckily enough, this time around, they were willing to listen to us, you know, and we were able to get to them to get them to understand the implications of the sector actually going down. And in terms of data, one of the things that we are also trying to do, AIP, also as part of this working group with government, is to bring in your telecoms, so your MTNs, your Vodacoms, and whatsoever, to see if we can get the websites of our members to be zero rated, so to print the communities that they operate in continue to get.
Okay, sorry, Carol, I'm sorry, we have lost the connection there. Sorry about that. I'm just going to go back to the chat box so that we are able to wrap in the next.
Given that, also the biggest thing still remains that even if we get it, where does that money come from? I look like I don't know.
Sorry, Carol, we are really losing you there, and I'm just worried around time and just making sure that we are able to stay connected. I'm seeing a lot of the comments in the chat box. There's a lot of concerns raised around freelancers. I think we have highlighted as SANEF that we saw the first people to really suffer the most were the freelancers, simply because they were easy for media institutions to let go of. I think we've struggled to quantify those numbers simply because they are not full-time employees and they come on as and when they are commissioned to do the work. But we do acknowledge that they were the biggest, they suffered the most during this time, and a lot of media houses, as the first step of staying afloat, then let go of freelancers, and I think there is an acknowledgement of that factor. To my panelists, one of the conversations we've been having is whether it's not time as a media industry we start championing the relief fund to actually assist the industry. I'm just wondering, Reg, when you looked into your report, you were very clear that the problems are going to be with us for time to come, whether government takes us to level 1 in the next few weeks or not. The impact on the media houses is going to be one that is felt for time to come. Yeah. Is it time to then start speaking for this emergency relief fund?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think we do need an emergency relief fund. And particularly for individual journalists who are hard hit. And this, I included in the report an anecdotal email from a freelancer who's left without any ability to earn income. And in fact, in the report, there's a survey was done that showed that of the freelancers surveyed, a quarter of them needed help with food. So, things are dire for some people out there, but yeah, we just have to think how this fund is set up, who decides where the money goes, what are the criteria for including people as beneficiaries. What makes someone a journalist? What is a media house? You know, who should get it? Those are the really important questions, as well as raising the money. But I think it's compelling, and as you've pointed out, the crisis isn't over. And my fear is that what is going to happen is there's going to be a trickle of retrenchments over the next few months and years, and that the news ecosystem is going to narrow, and you know, we're going to have news deserts in certain cases. So we need to put our minds to that, but it has to be done carefully. We can't just blunder in.
Phathiswa, a lot of people, when we talk around the impact or the crisis facing the industry, they tend to think about it purely through the lens of journalists losing their jobs. But the reality is that when we have fewer and fewer media houses, access to information is what is compromised. And how do you respond to those that say, you know, we are just the same as every other person within the economy who's losing their jobs? And your thoughts as well on this media fund.
Okay. Thanks, Mahlatse. I'm going to start with the last part. We cannot afford to find ourselves with very few voices remaining in the industry because of the impact of COVID-19. The plurality of voices is very important for our sector. The public must be able to say, I find resonance with this section, I find resonance with that media. And the minute you find a shrinking ecosystem within the news sector, it means that there are very few voices that people are going to be listening to. And that's not as good as it's supposed to be for our democracy to thrive. And also related to the relief fund, and I think in this case, we need a sector-wide approach. And I think it's something that we need to do. But when we get to that point of making that decision, we need to distinguish between whether we want sustainable journalism or we want profitable journalism. And because that's going to come up, it's going to come up in the discussions that we're going to have if we go at the route of a relief fund. But also, again, getting back to talking about journalism as a public good versus journalism as a commercial venture, because it's going to have influence and sort of impact in how the decisions are going to be made as to who gets what. But I think the idea of a relief fund and discussions around that is very important.
Thank you, Phathiswa. Adriaan, I'm going to let you also respond around the fund, but also just a lot of questions around, you know, how do we raise awareness around these issues so that people understand the severe challenges the industry is facing, and what can we do about that?
Thank you, Mahlatse. In terms of the fund, I would like to take a slightly different approach. I think the fund is obviously a good idea, but I think we as SANEF, we as individual editors can do much more to speak to corporate South Africa about where their advertising rands go. To reflect on what Reg has said about Google and Facebook, and I see there's been some mention made as well about what we're seeing in Australia, where the media industry there is pushing back against the money flowing to Google and Facebook. That is one way that you can try and fight those two behemoths, and you know, you have limited chances of success, especially as a smaller country. A more effective way, I think, would be to directly engage the private sector and institutions representing CEOs and the like. What I've seen personally with experience at News24 is that those decisions to spend money, massive amounts of advertising money on Facebook and Google and other social media platforms, are often made by advertising agencies and people working in the marketing departments and creative departments of companies. And that message doesn't trickle up towards the bosses of a bank or a cell phone company. And when you actually speak to them and tell them about these numbers and that the advertising bucks are going straight to the US, and they're often shocked. I've seen one or two examples where we actually managed to turn some of that around. So I think we need a much more direct approach there, maybe working with an organization like BUSA or BLSA as SANEF. Secondly, you know, the trust issue is always going to be with us. I think the best is to keep on doing good journalism. And secondly, to talk about how we do journalism. I think that's something that we are particularly bad at as in telling people, you know, what we do, especially under difficult circumstances. As SANEF, we are trying to do our bit with the Nat Nakasa Award. And then just lastly, if I can quickly respond to a question in the group, I've seen a question for journalism educators and what this crisis means to that. It's something that's been bothering me for a long time. And I think you guys in the universities and other places of learning should really get together and have a hard conversation about the type of numbers of intakes we do every year. There simply isn't jobs for those students. There aren't jobs for those journalism students when they leave journalism school. We should have a hard conversation about the number of intakes. We will always need well-trained journalists. Journalism education will be necessary for a long time to come, but I've been concerned about the numbers for a while, and I think that's definitely a conversation worth having. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriaan. I'm going to give you guys a chance to just do closing comments, but Reg, this question, I think it's from Anton. I will just ask you to just answer it, where they're saying the report mentions that in 2019, every online reader to a newspaper was outnumbered by 4.5 readers of the print paper copy. On what are these calculations based on? And then if you could answer that, and just some closing comments, because we have run out of time and I know people have other things to go to.
I don't remember writing that, so I'll have to look at the report. It's probably an international figure. I relied to a large extent on the Reuters Institute at Oxford, which is an excellent resource. But obviously, it might be different here. It might have changed. And certainly over the COVID period, that would have changed completely. I mean, there would have been very few people actually reading print. And I think the recognition is that people are moving online. They just are, where they can. Our problem in South Africa is that, you know, literally half the population is poor by any definition, and about a quarter is desperately poor. And those people need to be somehow connected. And at the moment, only the SABC serves those people, through radio mainly. So they need to have other sources of news, and they need to have, and we need diversity. And one of the ways of doing that is by actually bringing down data costs, bringing down the costs of being connected to the internet. And in fact, even the cost of smartphones is an issue. So those costs need to be brought down in order to give people a greater diversity. There's nothing wrong with people having their news from the SABC, but they need other sources as well.
Phathiswa?
From my side, I think the idea of approaching the business sector, as Adriaan is saying, is correct. But I'm thinking short term, what do we do now? People are in distress, people are losing jobs, freelancers have no source of income. So what do we do now? So can we, is it possible for us to split our approach into what we do at the moment, and then look at medium to long term approaches to dealing with the problem? But I think also the idea of, in our case, we have seen significant growth on our digital platforms, but the reality is we can't put public content or public service content behind paywalls. That remains an issue for us, but our approach is to build news consumer networks online such that we're able to use those as a currency to the advertising sector. But putting public service content behind paywalls is not something that we will be able to do. But the last one is that as we continue talking about the disruption of the business model for journalism in the media sector, we also need to look at the critical things that we need to do in reviewing our operations. We need to look at our resource velocity, how we're using the resources that we have currently. We need to look at what constitutes our revenue portfolio, because we know that we are now in distress in the areas that we used to rely on for revenue generation. We need to look at our cost structures, and we need to look critically at our value proposition, which is journalism. But basically journalism is about selling trust. Are we trustworthy? Why should anyone support journalism? that's my input.
Very important questions. Very important question. I think as we plead for help, we always have to make sure that we are doing the right thing consistently. Adriaan?
Thanks, Mahlatse. I kind of used the previous slot as my closing remarks. So just to say that I think we need each other going forward. It's good to have these chats and hope to have more of them. And thank you to Reg for a wonderful piece of research to kick us off.
Thank you very much. I just want to use this moment to say thank you very much for everyone who participated in this discussion. As the South African National Editors Forum, we are trying to find ways to provide some relief. We are very much aware of the crisis. And again, we just want to say thank you a million to our journalists who continue to work really, really hard under very trying circumstances. And many of them, as we've mentioned, are working facing their own economic challenges with salaries being cut. They continue to work, putting themselves at risk. We know several of them have been infected in the line of duty. We've already lost one reporter, and we really have to celebrate the sacrifices that they're making. And I think as the leadership of the industry, we owe it to them to ensure that we can secure their jobs. But also we thank all our partners for making sure that this conversation starts within the South African public, because it is only with the public that we can then gain momentum. Even if we end up with any relief fund, it will be the public that needs to support it. To corporate South Africa, we are continuing to appeal to them to support traditional news agencies and not go for the Facebooks and Googles that are not even taxpayers in our country. I think corporate South Africa has a role to play with the funds that they have. Can they consciously choose South African public so that they are contributing to keeping democracy alive, access to information a reality for the millions of South Africans, especially in these trying times where we have the duty to not only inform and educate, but also to hold those in authority accountable in this time of crisis. For everybody else who has suggestions on how we can provide relief for the industry, can you please reach out to us at SANEF? Kate and Hopewell are in the office and will be taking on board some of the recommendations. We are continuing to speak to various players in South Africa to see how we can make this real. And all of it is in the effort of saving journalism and just making sure that we continue doing the work of keeping the South African public informed. With those few words, thank you very, very much for joining this webinar. The report is available on our website. There is also an executive summary. Can we please share it widely, and can we get the conversations going? Thank you.
Thank you.
Warmest thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
All right. Thanks, Kate.